All right, good evening and welcome to the AITP North Central Florida Chapter's first official meeting of 2019. I am your local chapter president, Don Pizzette. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We've got a great audience right here in the studio with me, as well as those of you who are watching either live or, hey, watching this recorded later on down the road. We appreciate all the participation in the chapter, as always. All right, a little bit of chapter business right here at the beginning. I did mention this is the first official meeting of 2019, so I want to do another thank you to our board that was installed back in December. We have a number of new faces around here, which is always exciting, and we encourage you, the other chapter members, to always be involved in the chapter as well. There's a lot of fun stuff here. For those of you that make it in person, you get a chance to network and exchange information and ideas with other people in the community. For those of you online, though, you're not left out. Make sure to participate on our Facebook channel. You can always throw in comments and queries right there. We encourage you to attend the local meetings if you can. It is a ton of fun. All right, well, we have a great presenter lined up for tonight. We have Mr. Bryan, who is an edutainer with IT Pro TV. He has been teaching a lot of technology, just topics in general, but a lot of CompTIA certification training over the last several years. He's an award-winning instructor who holds certifications from, I don't know, quite a few different vendors, Wes.
CompTIA, Microsoft, yeah.
Do I even want to try and list them off?
No, probably not.
All right, well, tonight you are going to be promoting, or not promoting, but talking to us about TCP. So, Wes, I'm going to basically, well, actually, before I turn the floor over to you, let me just, a few other little items to mention. First off, if you have a cell phone, if you wouldn't mind putting that on vibrate for me, please. That's a great way to knock Wes out of his flow. And the other thing is, if you have questions, if I can ask you to hold the questions to the end, we'll do a Q&A session. I'll walk around with a microphone and give everybody a chance to ask. For those of you that are remote, just throw your questions right there in Facebook. We'll try and see those and get them answered. If not, we'll answer them later on after the presentation is over. All right, well, with no more further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Wes. Wes, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here. Yeah, we're going to be talking about, well, transmission control protocol, and it is a protocol, believe it or not, that has been around for a long time, and it is actually under the hood in our networks and doing work, and we don't even know it. So what do you say we go ahead and get started? We are going to dive in. We've got some things to look at here. Putting the work in TCP, putting the work in network. Let's go ahead and start right off with a little bit of history about TCP. TCP is an oldie but goodie. It's been around for a good long while. In fact, it goes back to the earliest revisions or additions, if you will, of the internet. It was started by the Department of Defense, the DoD, if you will. Department of Defense started this back in the 70s, believe it or not. And in the 70s, you might think we didn't have a lot of these inner network connections that we do today. So it's been around since the beginning of the internet, if you will. It was actually, believe it or not, we know it as transmission control protocol today, but it actually didn't start out as that. It started out as a single program, in fact, or protocol, if you will, in the earliest portions of ARPANET. It was originally named Transmission Control Program. It wasn't until later on that it actually got divided up, and it would form the basis for all internet communications today in what is known as TCP-IP. And yes, it was before the World Wide Web, believe it or not. The World Wide Web, as we know, it's only one facet of the larger internet as we see it today. If you want a little bit of the specifications, the RFC, the request for comments that is maintained by the Internet Engineering Task Force, the request for comments is marked December of 1975, and that's RFC 675. If you wanted to check that out on your own, I would encourage you to. If you like reading stereo instructions, or these instructions don't read very easily, but you can definitely find some information if you want more on the origins of TCP. Now, interestingly enough, Transmission Control Protocol was originally developed by the developers, if you will, of ARPANET, and one of the things that we know today is called TCPIP Model. This model was originally designed by the developers of this network in ARPANET. And TCP, again, TCP/IP, this model, it's an architectural model. that defines or divides up the functions of our internet communications by layers, and it's been widely adopted. It is the most widely adopted communication protocol out there, and it is called the Internet Protocol Suite. All right, if we look at the TCP-IP landscape, you'll see that TCP-IP was actually this layered model that divided the functionality and the services in the internet communications into these four layers here, if you will. You have what's known as the application layer at the top part of the TCP-IP landscape, and this portion of the TCP-IP model is responsible for formatting our information in a way that the network doesn't have to worry about data formats, and makes it really transparent to the network. When we get into the next layer, you'll notice the transport layer, and the transport layer is where we actually start to move our information across our networks. The internet layer here in TCP/IP again, and you know I've mentioned TCP/IP. What I haven't really mentioned is the other part of TCP/IP, the TCP/IP model, and that's the Internet Protocol. TCP is one of the reasons it got the name TCP/IP is because these form the two major protocols that actually move our information across different networks. IP being responsible for routing. So you can see that it is a major portion of our internet communications. Now, we have the internet layer of the TCP/IP landscape, and that's where we have things like our routing. This is where our IP addresses get attached to our data packets, allowing us to figure out the destination as our information goes from the source of the communication across various networks to its destination. We also have the network interface layer. The network interface layer, this is where we worry about things like our links and our physical electrical mechanics of the networks and their communications. So where does TCP fit in this overall place? Well, TCP, it fits at the transport layer. Now, interestingly enough, Transmission Control Protocol also has another sibling that operates at this layer too, and we're not really talking too much about here, but I just want to go ahead and mention, and that's also UDP. Transmission Control Protocol and UDP, they operate at the same layers of the TCP/IP model. Transmission Control Protocol gives us what's known as reliable services and reliable delivery, and well, UDP, it's unreliable. It doesn't really care if your information gets where it needs to or not. Now, there's another model out there, and this is known as the OSI model, and it's interesting because today we use the OSI model as more of an educational standpoint. It was designed by an organization known as the ISO, and that's the International Organization of Standardization, and they are an international standards body that's made up of 126 different worldwide standards bodies, and they come together and they formulate standards for network communications, if you will, and they allow for the interoperability between dissimilar systems. And it's one of the reasons that we want standardization, so that we can have dissimilar systems and they can communicate appropriately. Interestingly enough, that the TCP/IP model is divided up into layers, and so is your OSI model. Your OSI model is divided up into layers. You see that the TCP/IP model is divided up into 4 layers, where the OSI model is actually divided up into 7 layers, a little bit different, and it defines network communications. Now, when we look at the OSI model, it's interesting because TCP/IP was actually developed by the developers of the Internet for Internet communications prior to the OSI model's existence. It's interesting today when we are, as educators, when we're talking about TCP and when we're talking about where its place is generally in networking, a lot of times we reference the OSI model, and that isn't uncommon today. Keep in mind that the OSI model was developed by the international organization as a standard way or standardized way to build and design networks. However, today you will notice that when we reference the TCP-IP model or the OSI model, like I said, it's common practice to kind of reference them together. So we might say transmission control protocol in TCP-IP sits at the transport layer, which is layer 3 of the TCP-IP model. However, when we compare this to the OSI model, and I didn't mention what the OSI model was either. The OSI model is the Open Systems, the Open System for Intercommunication. Oh, actually I got that wrong there. The Open Systems Interconnection Model there. Took me a second there. And you can see the layers that we have here. Notice that we have 7 layers, unlike the 4 layers of TCP/IP. Notice that at the top of the layer here, we have the application layer. And the application layer in the OSI model, it's really one of the only layers that the user interacts with directly with programs and applications through their computers. And the application layer is responsible for taking our information and giving us an access into the network. Next, we have the presentation layer, and the presentation layer that is responsible for taking our information and formatting it in a way that it can be then placed on the network. And here's where TCP starts to come into play here. TCP actually operates on a couple of different layers in the OSI model. It operates at the session layer and the transport layer. The session layer is responsible for connection establishment, maintaining that connection, as well as terminating the connection. Now, the transport layer functions a lot like the transport layer, the transport layer in the OSI model. It works a lot like the transport layer inside of the TCP/IP model as well. Now, the network layer, when we get a little bit below that, that's where IP actually sits. So when we talk about TCP/IP model versus the OSI model, and we talk about IP addressing and figuring out where the source of the communication goes to the destination of the communication, and the routing in between those networks, that all happens at the network layer. And then the last couple of layers there are the data link layer, and this is where our switches operate at, and MAC addresses, if you will. And then finally, we have the physical layer, and the physical layer is responsible for the electrical mechanics of the network. All right, so what is transmission control protocol doing for us? Well, it's doing a few things for us. It's doing connection establishment. It's also ensuring that we have reliable delivery as well as flow control. Let's go ahead and dive into a couple of these. So let's talk about transmission control protocols, connection establishment. All right, with a connection establishment, transmission control protocol is responsible for communicating between the source and the destination and sending a few messages, a series of messages, if you will, in order to establish that communication, ensure reliable delivery, and then once the communication is done, terminating the communication likewise. Now, I talked about connection establishment and a series of communications. Those series of communications that we have are what or is known as the three-way handshake, transmission control protocol, three-way handshake. This is where TCP negotiates a connection establishment through a series of messages, and this is done to negotiate and agree on the parameters of the communication. So transmission control protocol will reach out to the other side where you're going to send information and will actually start this host-to-host communication process. We looked at those other layers. It's interesting enough, transmission control protocol will see that information coming down the protocol stacks, as we sometimes call the models there, and it'll say, well, wait a second, hold on a second. You need to send your information and you need a connection established. Just hold on with your information there. Let me go ahead, let me reach out to the other side, and we'll start this three-way handshake. Now, it's interesting, too, because a computer can have multiple TCP sessions initiated as once, and later in the demonstration towards the end, I'll give you a chance to see that as well. All right, so here's the first part. In the first steps of TCP in the transmission control protocol, the client kicks off a process, and it's important probably to establish that term client. What do I mean by client? Well, in networking, the most common networking model that you have today is what's known as a client-server model. And from the standpoint of the software and the computer is a computer. It depends on how much hardware it has. You can have some computers that have bukus, loads of system memory, have loads of CPU strength, but at the end of the day, a computer is a computer. What defines a computer as being a client is a computer that is calling out to the rest of the network and saying, hey, I need a resource. I need a service out there. Does somebody out here on this network have that service? And then a server operating system on the other half of a client-server network essentially is the server that's listening out for that request and says, oh, hey, you need that service? Hey, you need some name resolution? You can send that information over to me. I'm here waiting. But when it comes down to it, a computer is a computer. A server, again, is responding and providing the services that other clients need to perform their day-to-day functions. So when we say that the client kicks off, understand that it's the client is requesting the service. This could be two computers. It doesn't necessarily and doesn't have to be a server sitting in a server closet or a data center. This could quite literally be two Windows computers sitting on a network when you're talking back and forth between them. In this aspect, the client would be the one that's initiating the communication, and the server would be the one that's responding. So when we say that in the first steps, the client kicks off the process by sending a synchronization request to the destination computer, that's in the form of what's known as a SYN packet. A SYN packet is a synchronization request. Hey, I've got to send you information. Can we synchronize? And that's what it does. The next part of this process, if the destination computer is online and a communication port is available, it will send back what's known as a SYNAC pack. And I remember when I was studying for this and teaching students as well, I would say a SYN packet, and halfway through it, it needs a Snickers break. It needs a snack. And that was one of the ways we would help to remember this process for exams and stuff. So if the destination computer that has received that SYN packet is online and it's listening out, it will respond with a synchronization acknowledgement packet, which says, okay, I realize that you want to synchronize our communications, and I'm ready and I'm available. All right. The final process there in the three-way handshake, the source computer. Again, remember the client that started this communication that said, hey, I need a connection and I need to establish a connection, will respond back with what's known as an acknowledgement packet. And that's the acknowledgement of a synchronization acknowledgement, if you will. Now, once this is done, now communication can happen. There is one other packet that I didn't mention in it because it's not a part of the three-way handshake, and that is when the communication is done, we have the FIN packet. The FIN packet is where the source computer, the client that started the communication, just tells the other side, hey, you know what? We're done talking. You can close this communication. So there is another one there that I didn't put in the slide, but it is important to know that once transmission control protocol goes through these steps, sets up the communication, connects to the other computer, the information is transmitted, then it'll send the source computer will send out a FIN packet that lets the destination know, okay, that's all the communication we have during this session. And by the way, I should mention that these are called transmission control protocol sessions, TCP sessions. When we set up this connection-oriented service, I say we, it's the networks and the brilliant engineers that design this. When this is set up, this is what's known as a transmission control protocol session. Now, it is important to understand that in some aspects we have to keep this process secure in a way because there are many, I would say, attacks that can actually happen against your networks, and I'm sure some of the security gurus out there can understand that this three-way process, this three-way handshake can be manipulated in a way, and it can lead to some malicious happening. So we definitely have to make sure that we keep our networks, even on a basic level, secure. All right, now I mentioned reliable delivery. The interesting thing about transmission control protocol when we say reliable delivery is that it is doing a lot for us. And here's where you see some more of the work that transmission control protocol is doing. And it's kind of one of those unsung heroes that we you know, if we're not looking at our networks, we really don't see. You heard Don introduce the presentation today. I remember Don, I'm going to pick on you, one time saying, Wes, if you really want to know what's going on in your networks, spend some time in a packet capture utility. You're going to find out what's going on. And it's very, very surprising that when you fire up, and we're going to see this, I've got some screenshots coming up here. I did this to show you what you would see, that when you do this, how much activity is going on your network, and you might not have a single device that you're working with right now. So it does happen in the background under the hood. Connection orientation. What do we mean when we say a connection-oriented service? Well, I want you to think about your mail carrier, just normal mail carrier. When you need to deliver mail, all right, and you want to make sure that it gets there, you want to ensure that it gets there, what do you do when you go into your mail carrier, right? You ask for delivery confirmation, right? Not only do we need the source and destination address, but we want delivery confirmation. Even more so, imagine sitting by the mail carrier and saying, okay, I've got my delivery confirmation, and I'm going to wait here. In fact, I'm going to wait until you tell me that you've delivered the package. You know, just because I paid for delivery confirmation doesn't mean I'm going to believe you. And connection-oriented services, that's one of the things that's great about a connection-oriented service like transmission control protocol, because it will set up your communications much the same way you do if you're using something like delivery confirmation. Now, to compare that, if you will, to its unreliable brother that isn't in the slides here, asked him to be here, but he never arrived, is the fact that user datagram protocol, UDP, this is the unreliable sibling to transmission control protocol. It is connectionless. It doesn't care. And to kind of give you an analogy and comparison, if you have delivery confirmation in your mail carriers, which is transmission control protocol, think of UDP as addressing your envelope, sealing it off, walking over to one of the blue mailboxes. I hope they're all blue across the United States so you guys understand. Walking over to the blue mailbox, dropping it in the mailbox, and what do? You don't sit by that mailbox and wait to, you know, see if the carrier's going to be there. Well, at best, you might look at the schedule and find out what the pickup dates are, but past that, you put it in the mailbox and you walk away. Well, that's essentially what user datagram protocol is doing. And again, we're not too much in the user datagram protocol, but it is one that I want to mention because it is definitely a comparison. Now, we also have segmentation, sequencing, retransmission, and reassembly. So transmission control protocol is very, very busy. And let's talk about a couple of those topics. Let's talk about segmentation and sequencing first. When we talk about segmentation, you'll notice in the first steps what your computer will do is it will use transmission control protocol as a way to separate your data into more manageable parts. That's called the segmentation, where it takes larger amounts of data and it actually divides it up. Think of it as putting it on the chopping block and chopping it up into more manageable pieces. That's segmentation, and believe it or not, transmission control protocol is doing that for us. The next thing is sequencing, which is interesting because not only does it chop up those packets, all right, it also numbers them, and that is important for things like reassembly. Because the most common network communication type today is what is known as a packet switching network. All right, that is something that is most common today. In the earlier days, we had what were known as circuit switching networks. And if any of you have ever seen the old switchboard operators that would plug in the circuits, right? Well, what were they doing? They were taking one form of a communication and making a dedicated pathway in between source and destination of the communications. Packet switching networks, which is what ARPANET went with, it was originally designed so that large portions of your entire network during military endeavors could be lost, and the packets would find their way around the network and still make it to the destination. Well, this is with things like transmission control protocol, because we can divide those packets up, and while each segment, as they're called, it's called segmentation, and they're called segments, as the segments travel over the network, they are numbered sequentially so that on the destination side, they can be rebuilt, and not only rebuilt, but they can be rebuilt in the right order, guaranteeing, again, more portions of that reliable delivery. Now you'll notice here that, notice in the middle section here, we've got packet 1 or segment 1, if you want to get technical with the jargon. Segment 1 comes in, 2 comes in, 3 comes in, and then all of a sudden 5 comes in. Transmission control protocol, remember, is monitoring the state of the communication between source and destination once it's established. That's one of its main benefits. And it says, well, hold on a second. Hold on. We've got segment 1, 2, and 3, but I'm expecting to see 4. I've monitored this, and we're supposed to see 4, and I don't see 4. So we're going to drop 6 and 5, and we're going to recall you to send segment 4 back over. And then segment 4 comes back over, and again, we start that flow control after that. So that is the segmentation, sequencing, reassembly, and sometimes retransmission. And again, like I said, we'll see that because, well, now it's time to look a little bit more under the hood. This is what a lot of the geeks like me like to see too. All right, so one of the things that I went ahead and did is we fired up a packet capture utility, and I just happened to use one that's common in the industry today, Wireshark. Maybe some of you have probably seen this at once or twice before. And what Wireshark allows us to do, remember I was telling you that if you want to know what's going on with your networks, get in there and look at the packets as they traverse your network. Well, this is one of the ways that you can do that by firing up a wire packet analyzer, protocol analyzer, and then finding the protocols that are going on your network. All right. Now, I also mentioned that in the beginning, remember that I said that TCP-IP is a layered model. Well, one of the things that I really like about the packet capture utilities is that if you fire these up and you capture these packets to see what's going across your network, is you can actually see the TCP-IP layers right here. Now, you're going to notice that it starts at transmission control protocol, but there's nothing above that, right? Sometimes there is. Sometimes you'll see SSL in there. Sometimes you'll see application data and some of the higher layers, but notice where transmission control protocol sits. It sits right above what's known as the internet layer, and notice that IP is right there. And then under that, we have Ethernet, and these are our link layer protocols, if you will. So you can actually see those layers divided up. So if you want to, understand where is transmission control protocol in the larger landscape of things, the packet capture utilities are excellent for allowing you to do that. Now remember, we said the three-way handshake. I almost said 3. Let's try counting right. Three-way handshake. We have what's known as the Synpack, the SynACPack, and the ACPack, but you guys have already seen that. What does this look like? Well, believe it or not, and I know it's kind of hard to see. We'll dive in a little bit closer here. The very first 3 packets that I captured were actually a TCP three-way handshake. Now, I know it's a little hard to see, and we'll dive in here, but you can see packets number 5,000, and we'll just say 48, 49, and 50 are actually a 3-way handshake that was made by me connecting to Google's web server. So we go ahead, we fire up the Wireshark, we connect to Google's web server, and we're capturing that traffic as it happens. So believe it or not, if you're connecting to a website, you will, well, maybe not see it because it's under the hood, but if you fire up one of the packet capture utilities, you can definitely see this information. And what are we talking about? Well, let's zoom in a little bit on it. You can see those 3 parts of the handshake right there. First, we have the SYN request, and notice I left a little of the HTTPS in there. You can see some of the protocols there as well. So HTTPS, probably something that you see on a daily basis in the background, is relying on transmission control protocol. Some of the things that I didn't put in the packet capture utility are things like, for instance, when we need encryption. You need encrypted communications between you and the server. You have to have a connection establishment and reliable delivery to make sure that that encryption process and the communication of things like certificates happen the way they should. Notice the SYNAC packet. The SYNAC packet comes back from Google's web server in this case and says, yeah, I'm ready for it. I acknowledge that you want a synchronization. And it's interesting because the last part is an acknowledgement, and then after this we have a connection establishment, we've got communication, we've got reliable delivery, and you didn't see it in there, but once I was done communicating with the Google web server, we had a FIN packet in there too. Now, one of the things I mentioned is that not only does transmission control protocol help us negotiate connection establishment through this 3-way handshake, I also mentioned that you could have multiple transmission control protocol sessions at one time. One computer could. So what I did is I went ahead and I just took a screenshot of the Windows command prompt, and we ran a utility called netstat. And it's network statistic utility. It's been in Windows for a very long time. And notice that you can see the local address of my computer on the left-hand side, and you can see, well, the foreign address, who we're connected to out on the right-hand side. And notice that we have those 2 transmission control protocol sessions already established. And it does look like this is going to pretty close to the same address, a little bit different there, but it is 2 separate instances that of a transmission control protocol session. Now, one of the last things I want to mention here is reliable delivery. All right, here are some of the other examples of the other communications that I didn't have in the list earlier, but you can see some of them here. Remember, one of the things that we said, that I said is that segmentation and that recall for retransmission, or if it receives a duplicate of the communication, it's going to let the source know. It's going to say, like, for instance, you can see a duplicate acknowledgement packet here. You can also see one that's out of order, and then right after that, a request for retransmission. So these are some of the reliable delivery mechanisms that happen underneath the hood. So reliable delivery, remember that retransmission, again, is transmission control protocol just calling out to the source and saying, hey, I received this packet, I received this packet, wait a second, I don't need the next one in the list. Go ahead and retransmit the next one that I was expecting to see. And again, that's through that segmentation, sequencing, and then monitoring that communication from beginning to end. Last thing that happens, and I've already mentioned this, but is the transmission control protocol once our communications are done. So for instance, once I closed the web browser down, transmission control protocol reaches out to, in this case, Google servers and says, all right, that's all of the communication, we're done, and that's all we have. And that's a little bit about transmission control protocol, putting the work in network.
All right, Wes. Well, thank you very much for presenting. You said that's a little bit about TCP, but it was actually quite a bit about TCP.
It is.
And as a result, I'm sure some people have some questions. So we're going to take some time right now to go around and give everybody a chance to throw your questions at Wes. Let's see how uncomfortable we can make him.
All right.
I do have a handheld microphone, so if you have a question, give me a signal. I'll bring it over to you. You can ask, and then I'll just kind of move around from person to person. So who would like to go first?
Wes, thank you very much for your presentation. Learned a lot today. You mentioned that this protocol is subject to attack. Can you give us just a basic idea of how, not that we want to, but how could somebody attack a network or the TCP protocol itself?
Absolutely. So in the part, the question was how can transmission control protocol be attacked? And there are various ways that can happen. One of the ways is through what's known as a Synflood attack. And again, it's a manipulation of the three-way handshake. What happens, again, to kind of go under the hood a little bit, is when I send, let's say I'm the source, well, I guess I would be. I'm the source of the communication, you're the destination, right? When I say that I want a synchronization from you, I send you a synchronization or a synchronization request. Now you, as the server responding back to me, you give me a Synpack pack. But you reserve a portion of your memory space, your physical RAM. You reserve a portion of the memory space waiting for that acknowledgement to come back for me, saying, okay, let's go ahead and start transmissions. But what if I send you a SYN packet and you send me a SYN acknowledgement back, you reserve a portion of your memory, and I say, you know what, I'm not sending you an acknowledgement. In fact, I'm going to send you another synchronization request. And you send me a SYN-ACK back, and you reserve that portion of memory waiting for another acknowledgement packet that's not going to come. And we do this over, and we do this over, and we do this over. You're out of memory now. And now you, as an authorized user, legitimate user, try to make a request from that server or component, and it can no longer respond to legitimate requests. So it is one of the things that on your gateway devices leading in and out of your networks that you do have to take steps to ensure that when that SYN packet is sent, a lot of times your connectivity devices will say, all right, I'll send you an acknowledgement back, and the device can free up those resources, and then it can act as a proxy waiting for the acknowledgement to come back.
All right, Wes, we got a question from Facebook.
Okay.
So the question is, can we use tools like what you showed, like Wireshark, to see if our computer has been hacked?
You can. That is one of the things that you can do. One of the things you can do with your protocol analyzer, if you think you've been hacked, is a lot of excess activity that is coming from a device that you aren't really using. That's a good sign that something's going on with that device. If you aren't actively using it and you've got a lot of communications coming from a specific device, the other thing that you can do is you can also use it to analyze your traffic flows in between your device and another device on the network, so you can find out what services are being used as well, identifying the protocols, if you will. And if there's a protocol that's is being transmitted on your network, you might have to do a little research because, like I said, a lot of things are going on in the background, and it's all part of normal network communications. But once you know what the normality is, you can find out what the abnormality is. And if there's a service running on your networks that you don't expect to be there or you don't think should be there, you could do a little bit more research and then potentially isolate it down.
So the question I had was, if you were just getting into like IT, what kind of role or position would be thinking about these kind of TCP? Is it
probably your network admins? If you're just getting into it, it's good foundational knowledge, I would say, and it's something just understanding what the basics of network communications are. So foundationally for that, I believe that would be a good start, just to understand how network communications operate, and then also allows you the ability to troubleshoot and determine what the problems are on that too. But when it comes to network analysis, I would definitely say that that's your network admins, and they're responsible for making sure that your communications get routed and sent to the appropriate places along the network. They'll definitely be the ones that spend a lot of time in the packet capture utilities. Now, if you're a server administrator, you might be running that packet capture utility on a specific resource like a server just to find out, hey, why do I have a lot of excess traffic coming in and out of this, this machine? But I would say probably your network engineers.
On Steve's question, you responded about the Synflood attack. Is that a form of a man-in-the-middle attack? Because don't you have to be in between the sender and the receiver to inject these packets in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is true, and that would be, it allows us a little bit more manipulation. We can do what's known as a TCP session hijacking attack with the man in the middle. That is where you have somebody that is using these utilities, because it's always important to understand that most of our administrative utilities and tools can also be used for malicious purposes as well, and somebody could potentially see that information. It's one of the reasons we want to use encryption, because if they can steal part of that three-way handshake, and then they can do what's known as replay it. Basically, we take that and we play it back to the server later, then we could potentially create an unauthorized session, or if we're in the middle at the time, we could actually steal that and we could eliminate the legitimate authorized user and do, again, what's known as a TCP session hijack.
Wes, as far as routers are concerned, what is the role of a router in TCP? And what is packet sniffing? I've seen this term. Can you explain that a bit?
Absolutely. So routers are really the workhorses of the backbone of the internet. If it wasn't for routers, we probably wouldn't be able to communicate across all of these networks, because really the internet today is just a bunch of local area networks all shaking hands, and it's the routers that actually allow the communications to traverse those different networks. They're responsible for inspecting destination IP addresses, looking at a database known as a routing table, and figuring out where that information is supposed to go, even if they're not directly connected to the network. That's one of the brilliant things about routers. See, switches have a limitation. When we talk about a switch is limited to it only understands and knows what's directly connected to it. So for instance, here in our facilities, the switch is aware of all of the physical connections that it has made to it. However, the router that we have here doesn't have to be aware of a network that is halfway around the world. It can talk to its nearest neighbor and say, hey, do you know how to get to that network? Because I'm not connected to it. I've looked at my database and it tells me I should send it to you because you told me you can get there. and we can move data across those networks, basically allowing us to communicate across the internet. Did I answer all the question? I think there was 2 parts to that. Did I answer all of that? Packet sniffing, yes, sir. So packet sniffing, we call that protocol analysis, packet sniffing. So the data units of measurement, a packet essentially is a group of bits that has a certain bit of extra information like addressing, protocol types attached to it, and then that grouping of bits is placed on an electrical wire or radiated energy, doesn't matter if it's wired or wireless, and it's sent to its destination. That grouping of bits is then inspected by the connectivity devices, whether it be a switch, depending on if you're talking local area network communications, or if we're talking across networks, like a wide area network communication, the information that is in that group of bits could also be an IP address, and that's what the routers are using in order to determine where to send the information. So we say packets, that's that grouping of bits that is sent between source and destination. And sometimes those bits are a little bit too big, and then transmission control protocol is there to divide those bits up and make them in smaller segments, as they call it, and then we address those individually, and each one of those packets also sends across the network as well.
Isn't there a more detailed functionality of the Wireshark that allows you to inspect packets, the packet sniffing? I could
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, in one of the demonstrations, Wireshark has its own institute. There are some brilliant minds that use it well beyond my knowledge. What I did to show you our transmission control protocol is I did what is known as following a TCP stream. So we had hundreds, if not thousands, tens of thousands of packets that were captured in what we seen in that time span that I caught the 3-way handshake. What I did is in Wireshark, I filtered it out and I said, take this one transmission control protocol session and let me follow that entire stream from its establishment till the time that it's broken down. So what that allowed me to do is kind of extrapolate just what I was looking at, you know, in the mix of all these protocols and all these different packets, if you will, that were captured. I said, I just want to see transmission control protocol. I don't care about things like DNS. I don't care about some of this IPv6 information that's going back there. Just pull that out there so that we can follow that stream from beginning to end. And there's much more to it than that. That doesn't even scratch the surface. Wireshark is a very complex protocol or packet analyzer, and they have institutes with entire curriculums dedicated to just that software.
And Wes, during your extrapolation of that packet stream, would you be able to identify any information if it wasn't encrypted? Would that be part of that packet sniffing per se?
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. And that's one of the reasons. So the question is, if we were pulling that information, could we read that information? And that goes back to your question about a man-in-the-middle attack. Yes, you can. It's one of the reasons that you'll see a lot of the major companies, especially just almost every website that you visit today, you'll see HTTPS, and that's because they want to encrypt that communication. So if somebody like myself is out there sniffing the information, that jargon there, sniffing the information, is just seeing what's going on, I could grab that information. I could have that information. I know it's information, but I can't read it. And that's the great thing. If we encrypt, if we add encryption to our communication streams, then what we do is we prevent unauthorized access. We give it confidentiality. If you might have heard that in the security field. Encrypt your information so that if you are sending end-to-end communications, nobody can view that. Or let me rephrase that. They could view the information, but they couldn't decipher what it says.
Another question for you. You've mentioned the protocols. I have this just basic question. Is there another protocol out there that we haven't discussed? Does the government, for instance, have a separate protocol that can work within the ecosystem of the Internet that has not been explained or revealed to anyone? Just asking.
I could tell you that, but then that might be the end of the conversation. No, I am sure that they are developing communication protocols all the time. In fact, I know one that is newer than transmission control protocol. It's called the real-time control protocol, and it handles multiple connection streams a lot better than transmission control protocol. So, yeah, I'm not sure if they do. I'm sure probably out there on the dark web somewhere.
All right. Do we have any more questions? All right. Let me sneak back up here.
Sure.
Wes, I want to thank you again for coming to present us. That was an excellent topic, and I think you fielded everybody's questions. So, big round of applause for Wes.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, I know it's an exciting topic because we all use TCP every single day. We're using it. If you're watching remotely, you're using it right now.
That's
absolutely. Right. So definitely an important building block of the communications we do. All right, Wes, thanks again. Absolutely. And just for everybody out there in TV land and for everybody right here in the studio with us, thank you for attending the meeting. I want to encourage you to come along to our AITP chapter meetings each month. Bring a friend, anybody who you think might benefit from learning the information that we present here. We're working on kind of fleshing out our presenter schedule for the year, which is why I want to do a quick call for topics. If you have a topic you'd like to see a speaker on, please let us know. We always want to put together presentations, but we want them to be as meaningful as possible. So if there's a particular topic you want to hear on, please shoot us an email at info@AITP-NCFL.org. And that way we can look at that and say, all right, here's a topic. Let me go find the appropriate speaker and get that lined up. Or if you happen to be a speaker or interested in giving a hand at trying to be a speaker, let us know. Again, info@AITP-NCFL.org. We'd love to hear from you, chapter member or just random person. We are always interested in sharing information and just, learning more in general about IT. All right, well, I think that's going to be a good spot to wrap up our chapter meeting. We actually don't have a speaker lined up for our next chapter meeting, otherwise I would announce that. So look for that in email. We'll shoot that one out as soon as we've got it scheduled, and we'll pick back up with our meeting in February. All right, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for attending. Have a great evening.
Thank you.